Staci, thanks so much for coming on. I'm excited to chat with you. You're one of those people that has really learned your leadership lessons um, by doing the grind, by being on the other side of leadership, observing what works and doesn't work, having mentors, downloading those perceptions, reading the books, and then growing your career in a corporate environment, and then taking your thought leadership and bringing it out into the world. And that's there's so many stories I want to get to that led to that journey, but maybe you could just for the audience's sake, what has that journey been like? What are some of the big milestones or lessons that were foundational in your perspective on leadership as you see it today?
Yeah, no, thanks. First of all, I'm happy to be here and thank you for that question. I can't even tell you the amount of different stories, right, that I've had over my career. But one of the things that sticks out is I've always been kind of a grinder, a hard worker, a go-getter, and thinking about different opportunities that presented myself. I always was raising my hand to say, let me try this, let me do this, let me learn. There's a whole let them theory, but it was the let me theory. Let me figure out what specifically I can do to learn more and be enriched. And a lot of it has happened to be right place, right time, raise my hand to help out. And then I had an opportunity in 2019 to launch a company, and I wouldn't have had that opportunity, right, if I hadn't done all of my different varieties of roles throughout the career. Started as receptionist, administrative assistant. I used to call it president of daily operations because everything really came through the front desk of the organization. But that particular role launched me into a sales career, which launched me into a project management career, which then launched me into mergers and acquisitions. And that's how I got connected to my business partner when we launched Wickshire Senior Living in 2019. And so, a lot of it, right, is just relationships and cultivating the relationships and learning specifically how to interact with folks, especially, sometimes there's some folks that we don't necessarily enjoy, but we still have to work and respect and do all of those things together. And so, I think a lot of it, right, is grinding, doing the work, learn as you go. And then as you get to a leadership position, reflecting back on what you've learned, how do you improve it? How do you implement process improvement? How do you listen to your teams to continue to refine the just whatever the job is, and then really being authentic and when you do it and how you do it.
Yeah, I read a something you posted about being authentic and how you show up with people, and I think that's a very simple axiom that's easy to forget in the day to day.
Mhm.
I'd love to drill into that potentially a little bit later. So you ground your way through these different roles, raising your hand and saying, yes, I'll take that on, and volunteering for more, which is kind of the natural way that we progress in our careers, especially early on. You mentioned you made a stop in the project management world. And I in my one of my businesses have worked with a ton of project managers because that's a role where you have to influence without authority. You have to be a leader without having any freaking authority over the people you're supposed to lead. What did you learn about
Absolutely.
leadership as a project manager that maybe someone who's never been a PM wouldn't really appreciate or think about?
I with that, it was for me getting people to kind of buy into whatever the project is. What I found to be successful is helping them understand the why behind. We are implementing this project. Let's say it's a um, EHR system implementation, so electronic health record system implementation. And somebody in accounting maybe doesn't understand why they're being pulled in to help implement this project. And it all ties into billing, which ties into the financial component, which certainly ties into the accounting functionality within an organization. But it's really number one, I think it's taking time to get to know whoever's working on your project team, even though you don't have direct oversight of them, but getting to know who they are as a person, what drives them, what motivates them, and then helping to understand why specifically they're critical to the successful implementation of specific projects. I've always found a little bit of like you scratch my back, I scratch your back type of scenario too. I mean, there's some of that I think you have to just navigate throughout a project implementation. If somebody does me a favor, right? Maybe there's a task that I need them to prioritize, and it happens to compete with something else, and I say, hey man, I really need you to get this done for me in the future. I return the favor too if there's something that I can help with, and whether that's a connection, whether that's a task that needs to get done, whether it's just being an ear to brainstorm with any of those things. But it's really looking at your team and letting them know that they are really important as part of this project implementation, and they're incredibly successful, or they're incredibly critical to the success of the project. But it's getting to know your team as a person versus just a taskmaster, right, or task completer that needs to help execute and finish out whatever needs to get done.
Yeah, I heard you say a few things there. I mean, that intuitive understanding of the person I'm working with is a human being as well, and I should try to understand what motivates them, and in that context, help them see why they're so necessary and why this thing is good for them. Get that buy-in from them to participate in whatever the process might be. And was that intuitive for you, or was that a hard lesson to learn as you transition into that PM role? What if you can go back in time? Like, what was that learning curve like for you?
So there were certainly opportunities where I stubbed my toe pretty hard. Where especially because as you move into these types of roles where you are motivating a team that you have no direct actually responsibility over. If you come in, it's like the dangling right, the carrot or the stick type of philosophy and approach, and so there's not a ton of training maybe on the emotional intelligence side of project management. And so when you come in, like I've worked very hard, right? Like I have been an administrative assistant, and now I've been in sales. Now now I'm a licensed project manager. And so it's like that, does that make me somebody with more authority? And you learn very quickly, in fact, does not, it is, and so when I've had to come back and kind of cap in hand apologize, and instead of asking or um explaining why I need help directing or demanding of something. And when a lot of times, right, when you demand something of a colleague, it doesn't go very well because they don't have to do it. We're all part of a team, right, and teamwork is important. But if you treat them as if again, they're just a colleague to do something for you. I've had to go back a few times very early on in my career and say, like, I'm so sorry. I approached that completely wrong. You had to have a little bit of humility and humble pie, which I also think is something difficult for folks to do. I being one of those from time to time, but I've learned through just maybe some missteps that you can't come in and demand things of folks, especially again if they're part of a team and they're not somebody that is a direct report of yours. So I learned that quickly. After a couple hard lessons, I'm a quick learner on that end, and really adjusted my approach. And a lot of right, I think you have to adjust your approach on every specific project too, and really even every personality that you interact with. You can't take the same approach with every single person because every single person is living through something different in their personal life, which sometimes translates into how they show up at work. And so somebody may be having a bad day and it's because their dog just, they had to put their dog down. And that is, if you don't take that time to understand that, and you just again treat people like they are somebody to get an actual job done, and not part of a team approach, that's where I think you really start to have really critical missteps.
Yeah, that's good advice. You're right. We lead humans, and we're
Mhm.
complex, and we do have dogs and parents and pets and children and lives that don't always go perfectly, and that carries over into our
Correct.
work. In fact, it doesn't just carry over into our work; it's why we work. And so,
Mhm.
properly valuing that, it sounds like something you rapidly learned, maybe with a stub toe or two, as you said. So then you went from this PM role, and you end up having to be the boss of people who used to be your peers. What were some of the
Yes.
stubbed toe experiences like transitioning from peer to boss?
I had to learn really quickly that while I had built a friendship with these folks when we were on a peer level, I had to really adjust how I interact, with my team members. And there's certain things that as a leader of a specific project or as a team that I wasn't able to share, right? There were certain business decisions that I had to keep close to the vest. Whereas historically on a peer level, right? Like we're all sitting around the lunch table, maybe making some hypotheses about what's about to happen, right? Are there layoffs coming? Is there a reorg coming? Things that we just kind of, that coffee conversation that occurs. And when you move up in that role, there are different layers of information that you are tasked to keep close to your vest. Or what really was probably most challenging for me is when you had to have those performance conversations and where maybe somebody wasn't necessarily hitting the mark. It's how do you navigate? We were buddies, right? Like we would go out and have a beer after work at happy hour, and now I'm having to have a conversation specifically about your work product and where there's an opportunity to improve. And in that particular scenario, I had a couple of I was really fortunate to have some great mentors that I would literally role play conversations so that I could at least get it out for the first time in a safe space before sitting down in front of the person that you're having a performance discussion with, and figuring out, it's not a character assassination, right? It has nothing to do about who you are as a human, but there is a work product, right? And we're missing the mark here. And so let's talk about how we can improve that. And so, that was probably the most difficult part, is really coaching folks who were at a peer level. Now I am their supervisor. And that took, again, a little bit of practice, a little bit of what I call flexing my no muscle as well, at kind of from a project management standpoint. You'll be shocked to hear this, could be considered a control freak. And so one of the things that I learned how to do was, really delegate tasks, right? I couldn't do everybody's job for them. They are on the team because they have a talent. They are good at their job. And my job is to help cultivate and continue to make sure that they excel in their role, and position them for future opportunities. And so, part of that was taking a step back, making sure I was delegating, not making it easier for everybody, right? Because when I make it easier for everybody else, then I'm putting all of the stress on me. And then that's not fair to the team because I'm not showing up as a good leader because I'm so burnt out and overwhelmed on that side.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We can localize the conversation to the difficult conversations you have with someone who was previously a peer or someone who you just have a complicated relationship with, is really what it lumps into. And we could isolate that and talk about that in a vacuum, but reality is that difficulty happens in context where you might spend an enormous amount of your battery pack working through that difficult relationship laden conversation, only to then have nothing to give to somebody else. And so how did you think about managing your output and having enough to give to everybody? What did you have to learn or change about yourself in order to balance that?
Sure. So, I mean, I will be fully transparent. I got to a point where I was just burnt out. I was like, I can't do this anymore. And so I had to really evaluate, right? What am I doing? What type of stress am I self-inflicting versus what stress is actual true stress of the job? And yeah, and that was, I will
Good
say,
coach?
I can't
Did
take
you have
all
a
of the
good coach
credit.
asking you
I
that? Sorry to
say
interrupt.
that one more time.
Did you have a
Yeah.
good coach or somebody inserting that question and self-awareness into your world? That just sounds like something hard
Yeah.
to do on your own.
Yeah. So not a coach, but a therapist. So very similar. Yeah. And I will say I'll put a plug in. I think therapy is incredibly important regardless of what you're going through in life. And I took a long time to get on the therapy bandwagon because I could solve things myself, right? And it's like, but it was really important during COVID. And we can talk about that down the road, but like during COVID, I needed an outlet to talk about, because I was in healthcare, the stress, of just running a company in COVID. And when I would go to my friends or I'd go to my family, their answer was, "Well, just quit your job." It's like, "Well, that's not really the solve here."
Creating problems. Yeah.
Exactly, right, like, creates a different complexity should I go that direction. But I launched into that, and it's been really helpful, again, as I've continued to, deepen just my leadership experience and career. There's things I've taken from my personal life that I've applied to my professional life as well. But it's looking at, okay, what can I do to make my life easier and still be productive? What can I do to make my team's life easier? And some of that is sitting around a conference room table and looking at from a process flow. What are we doing? are we creating extra steps that are maybe nice to haves, but not necessary? And then, taking a kind of more of a holistic step back and saying, okay, this is this person's role. They need to do this job, right? This is this person's role. This is their function in the organization. And then if maybe it's not a right fit, then you have a different conversation, right? Like you don't have maybe the right person, the right role to get your results. And that, kind of all of that s- amplifies on top of each other until you get to the root cause of, where are we, what's going on? But, I got to a point where I was burnt out. And so I wasn't showing up probably my best self. I was stressed out. I was kind of short with folks. And then you think about, am I even giving clear instructions of what I'm looking for? Because I don't have the time to be strategic because I'm just crushing out work. And so, yeah, there was a lot of lessons. And again, a lot of it, right? You're doing it in real time, right? You're flying the airplane and you're making the changes as you're flying the airplane. And so it's like, how do you do that successfully? And I'd love to say I did it successfully every time, but I didn't. But I think that's how you learn and you get better is when you just take the lessons learned and apply them and readjust. And I think we should be constantly readjusting our approach just as we navigate our careers, as our personal lives, whatever it is that we're navigating.
Well, it sounds like you did grow through that, which is not always the
Mhm.
case. And if a listener's hearing that, what I hope they hear is the amount of grace we could and should maybe extend to new leaders, because it is a brutal learning curve. You don't get a handbook. You're told, hey, you were great at job A, now go lead people who do job A, but that is a totally different function. There's this comedian I love. I don't know if you know who Mitch Hedberg was, but he had this great joke that was like, hey, you're a great chef. Can you farm? And it's like, well,
Right.
what? Like, no, there's food connected, but that's it. There's such different things, and we don't necessarily extend the most grace in that time for the human who's going through that learning curve. And you went through a natural burnout phase to get through it. Something got you through it, though. Therapy sounds like maybe a mechanism, but are you able to think back and go, what was the turning point for you? When did you begin to change the nature of the curve to one where you're like, I got this?
I think it was, I mean, I will say, looking at the team that I surrounded myself with, I mean, they were really instrumental and also, I think, pulling us all through together that burnout. But I had two really just spectacular colleagues that we kind of pulled each other. Everybody had a turn at being burnt out. We weren't burnt out at the same time, thankfully. And so, it was really surrounding yourself with good team members. And then for me, I just had to kind of make a fundamental change in my life and say, you know what? I have to focus on me slightly. I started I'll give my little Orange Theory plug. I'm an Orange Theory nerd. I work out 5, 6 days a week. It's my outlet, right? It's my hour of a day that I put just for me, and it is, I have no phone. I have, I just somebody tell me what to do. So I run on the treadmill and go, I hate my life, but when I'm done, I love it on that end. But that was, it's a making myself somewhat of a priority. And I was, encroaching on 40, going, okay, it's like this your midlife crisis, if you will. Do I want to keep doing this? I think it is interesting as especially some of the female folks that I um just socialize with and our colleagues of as we got to the kind of 40 mark, felt like a lot of people took a step back in their career to say, what do I want to do? Right? Am I on the right path? Am I doing what I want to do? And it is that I think it's like that critical moment where you reflect and go, okay, if I want to, maybe I am on the right path. Maybe I want to make a change. And it is interesting to see folks do that. But for me, it was really kind of taking a step back, knowing that I had to prioritize myself. If I was working 12 hours a day, and was I really in those 12 hours a day being as productive as I could be, or was I creating more busy work for myself? And so I said, okay, I can take an hour. I literally can take an hour for myself every day. I do it 6:15 in the morning before the day gets going. And it's my way to pause and reflect and set my intention for the day. But I had to get to a point where I was like, if I don't make a change, right, I may end up in the loony bin. Like I just need to make a little bit of, and so that was it. I took a step back, prioritize myself. And I do think, right, doing something physical, especially for computer jobs. If you're sitting all day long on the computer, it's so important you just get up, go for a walk, go see the sun, go do something, have a hobby that's not work. And I know you and I kind of shared a little bit before about it was incredibly important for me, and feedback that I share with other folks is make sure that work is not your only identity, because that can be, and I know we'll probably get into that here in a little bit, but that is really when we introduce ourselves, it's like, hi, I'm Staci, I'm the chief operating officer. Well, that's what I do. That's not who I am. And so being able to separate the identity of work from personal was also really important. And I learned that from traveling, went over to Europe. The European culture is so different from ours, right? They really prioritize family and wellness and good meals, and work is something they do, but it's a means to an end. Versus us is like we strive and strive and strive and strive and strive to continue to grow our career, and that's who we are.
And so many things I want to ask about there. I mean, it's no surprise to me that one of your components of your solution set was prioritizing self care. I think would be one observation. And my one of my early coaches helped me realize that self care is the non-negotiable thing. To your point, it's 6:30, it's 5:30, it might have to be early or late depending on your life structure, but if you don't do that, you're not building a bigger battery pack, and every day you're just depleting a little bit. And maybe it's Orange Theory, maybe it's a walk. Who cares? It's yours, and do something that's good for you, to create the energy required to go show up and be authentic and all the good things along the way. In that leadership transition, I wanted to ask a little bit about two aspects of some of the things you learned. What you've talked about a little bit is the mechanisms that might have changed, showing up for people, apologizing when you stubbed your toe. So I'd love to get a sense of what are some of the, maybe high level, or feel free to go deep if you want, but what are some of the mechanisms of leadership that you now absolutely know to be true that you wish your previous self would have known earlier?
Goodness. I think leading with a sense of humility is something that I wish I would have known early on in my career. And part of being a leader doesn't mean that you know how to do every single job. And I think my younger self thought if I didn't know everything about everything about everything, I wasn't positioned to be a leader. And you look at your team and you have folks on your team who are the experts in their subject matter. So I don't need to be the expert. What I need to know how to do is I need to know how to remove barriers for people. I need to know how to connect the dots to complete whatever XYZ task is in front of us. I need to know how to have enough emotional intelligence to know when to push and when to perhaps take a pause, and have to know when to make those tough decisions. But I think all of that ties back to humility and knowing that you don't have to be the solve of everybody's problem. And so that for me is one that again took some time to learn, took some stumbles and falls to learn, but I don't need to do everybody else's job. That's why there are other experts on the team to know what to do. I can come in and again help to eliminate barriers, help to maybe cast a vote if there's perhaps a maybe a disagreement of which direction we take. And then really my job is to set the strategy and then help to make sure that I've got team members to implement the strategy on that. And so that's one thing I think, just kind of having that sense of humility is certainly important. The other thing we talked about is the self-care side, and making sure that that is definitely on top focus. Other mechanisms I think is for me is continuing to do some self-learning and thought leadership, connecting with other folks in the space. One thing as a new leader, I think people need to know is it can be lonely at the top, right? Because our job is not to be friends with everybody on our team. So how do you find a network of folks who are in the same kind of season that you are from a leadership perspective that you can brainstorm with, outside of perhaps your organization even, because you have to make some decisions as a leader that not everybody's going to agree with, and people might be very vocal about the fact that they don't agree with it, and that is certainly their right to their opinion. But as you know, as a leader, you're tasked to execute, and there are certain things that maybe team members aren't privy to on why you're making specific decisions. But I do think it's finding a like-minded group of folks, a strong network where you can, just relate to folks because again, it's lonely at the top, and you are the one that has to make the difficult decisions. You have to have the difficult conversations, and I do think, especially as young leaders, we don't appreciate that. That is like we want to be everybody's friend. We want
Yeah.
everybody to like us.
Yeah, you mentioned two things there. At least I heard two things there. One is, that humility side is kind of tough to go through because you really recognize you're not that freaking important. And
Mhm.
that's
Yep.
it's there's this psychological journey you go through from I'm getting promoted because I'm important and look at all the accomplishment that got me promoted, and you try to ride that into leadership, and it's like, wait a minute, hold on, this is a different shape of puzzle piece. I have to
Yep.
abandon the concept that I really matter that much in this context. My job is to unlock
Mhm.
the potential of the people around me to drive them be accountable to the mission that we're responsible for. Like, whether it's my idea or their idea or my technical execution or theirs isn't important. In fact, it should almost always be theirs if I'm doing a good job of this. And that's a
Agreed.
brutal internal lesson I want to get back to in just a second. The other thing I heard you say is you're going to make decisions people don't like. And I think the definition of leadership is influencing people towards an advantage. And
Mhm.
influence, very important word in that. Being the influence means you're the proximal cause of change. That means they would not have done it without
Mhm.
your input, which people don't always like change. They, in fact, tend to resist. And so there's almost an
Agreed.
assessment we can do that goes, if you're not kind of pissing people off, if you're not kind
Mhm.
of pushing them or getting them to do things they wouldn't have done otherwise, which is what's probably going to drive them nuts, you're really not leading. And I struggled with that. When I became a leader, I wanted everybody to like my decisions and mechanisms and ways I did things. And, that just creates a problem you can't get out of until you acknowledge, it's not my job to make people mad, but doing my job is probably going to make people mad sometimes. And that's okay.
Absolutely, and that is one of the most challenging lessons I think to learn in leadership is you're not going to be because when you're on a peer level, right? Your goal is to be mostly friends with folks, right? You want to be certainly have a very pleasant relationship, definitely a respect. And I always say you don't have to like me. We don't have to like each other. I mean, ideally, you're an environment where you do like each other, at least enjoy each other's company, but we have to respect each other in our roles and our positions, and we have to again we have one mission. We're all sailing the boat in the same direction, and we either succeed together or we fail together. And there's a lot of the I think some undermining that just occurs naturally in maybe some folks fights to try to grow in the organization, and it's like, oh, I'm going to take credit for this. And I actually had a scenario where somebody, thought I was taking credit for their work, and I'm like, "I'm not, because if you ask me specifically how you got to this formula on this spreadsheet, I'm gonna have no idea because I didn't do the work." And so that was one thing where I really felt so bad because I was like, "I don't know why this person thinks I'm taking credit for their specific work." But that was a critical point in my career where I had to say, "Okay, did I say something? Did I what did I do to make that person specifically think that I was trying to take credit for the," and we did very different roles too. So that was the other thing where it was a little bit of a head scratcher. I was like, I don't really know, but I did again have that conversation and say, I'm sorry if you think that I was trying to take that, I'm happy to go raise my hand and tell somebody that I didn't do that. But if they were to ask me or question me on the specific work product, I wouldn't even know where to start because I didn't originate, I didn't generate the product.
Well, a lot of your work that I've seen on LinkedIn and writings and posts has to do with empowering other leaders. And so,
Mhm.
what we talked about so far are some of the mechanisms a leader could use to be empowered, right? Being comfortable, disrupting people, and making them do different things. Recognizing you're not that important. You mentioned role playing, which freaking love that. That's a huge part of what we do in my businesses. And those are mechanisms, but what happens, those are the tools or the tactics. But what happens with those tools and tactics is there's this internal conversation that we learn how to have differently as leaders. And
Mhm.
that internal conversation tends to happen in moments of stress or strain, when you need to have the uncomfortable conversation with someone who was a peer, when you need to challenge somebody's idea and help them recognize that's not going to get us where we're trying to go, right? Those moments of perceived tension. So, how have you thought about, or what are some of your tips that you give emerging leaders about how to
Mhm.
navigate that inner conversation, to have the courage and conviction and poise to execute those mechanisms? How do you help people get better at that part?
So I think there's a couple of things. I don't know if you've heard like the 5 by 5 rule, and it's, in 5 years, is this decision, is this whatever going to matter? And if it's not, don't give it any more than 5 minutes of thought. And that is one thing, because I think there's a lot of folks who carry the stress of, I'm going to make a decision and it's going to be something that is going to happen for the rest of time, right? Like this decision, where I'm never going to be able to change it, happens for the rest of time. And we always had a saying, we don't fly airplanes, right? So at the end of the day, if we make a decision, we're not going to crash the airplane. It may be the wrong decision, and then let's recognize it, let's fix it,
Yeah.
let's maybe take a different approach. But I think it's thinking about, I think there's a lot of folks who hold off on making decisions because there is that fear that it will be the wrong decision. And when you have that situation happening, that delays, again, on the project management side, if you're in the middle of a sprint, right? It delays the sprint. If we're not making the decisions. And I think it's looking at, what is how critical is this decision that we're making? How difficult is this conversation? And sometimes, right, it's eating the frog. Just do it. I mean, I will say, I can be somebody that's going to put it, if I don't want to do that task, I can figure out 4,000 other things I need to get done. And I talk to one of my business partners about that all the time. And I'm like, just do it. I'll tell her, you do it. And then she does the same with me. Just get it done. And then you do the task, whatever it is. And it wasn't nearly as bad as you made it up in your mind, right? It took 15 minutes to get done. You had a difficult conversation. The person on the receiving end receive that conversation as well as they could, right? Whatever it is. But I think it is, sometimes we just have to rip the band-aid and do it. So I think that's part of it too. And then the other thing, right, is like, just as a new leader, up and coming leader, I think back to your role play conversation, find a mentor and role play, because sometimes it is just, you've just never said the thing, right? And so you need somebody to practice saying whatever the thing is, and you find a safe space, you have the conversation, you do it a couple of times, and then when you actually have to do it, you're like, okay, it's not my first time saying it. I will say, I have also scripted, or made notes of what I wanted to make sure I was conveying in a message, especially if, again, a difficult conversation. Certainly, if you have to terminate somebody, making sure that you're working with your HR partner before you just randomly terminate somebody is important too. But, it's like, okay, having specific talking points ready, going into that conversation prepared, going into the meeting prepared, going into whatever it is prepared. But a lot of it, right, is role playing, having that conversation, eating the frog, just literally getting it done. First thing on your to-do list, knock it off. I'm a big paper to-do list person. It gives me satisfaction to cross something off my list. So I do it, get it done, and then you have that sense of accomplishment. The rest of your day is going to be easier because you did the hard thing first.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. Yeah, I can't agree more. Find a mentor and role play, huge advantage. I love the thoughtfulness. What's coming through loud and clear, Staci, about your perspective on leadership is you take it seriously and you care about the other people involved. And that might sound overly basic maybe to someone listening, but if you're not a leader, or if you haven't gone through that early leadership curve, it's really hard to do those things. Like, it's very difficult to actually slow down and think about the dynamic of it and properly assess the human across from you that you're trying to influence, and to take the time to sit down with a blank piece of paper and to write out the points you're trying to make and the thoughtful way you want to say them, and maybe to hunt down somebody to role play with, and maybe to read a book about time or priority management, like Eat That Frog, or 1 minute manager you mentioned before. Like that takes
Yes.
a lot of effort. That's doing the hard work, not necessarily working hard or working smart. What are some of the other doing the hard work things that maybe go unappreciated or unobserved for a leader once they've really matured into their own?
I think one of the things that's really important for a leader to do is to make sure that you're celebrating your teammates on successes or recognizing birthdays or recognizing milestones or whatever it is. And I think people don't realize a lot of times leaders are doing that out of their own pocket, right? They're not tapping into maybe a company budget, and they want to do it because they want to create that true team environment and make sure that people feel that they are part of a bigger mission than just, specifically you come in, you clock in, you do your job, you go home. And so it does take intention, right? To make sure that you've got the birthdays in place, right? We used to do birthday bagels. I would take everybody out to lunch for their birthday. And most of the time would pay for that for themselves because I wanted to, right? It wasn't like the company had forced me to do it, but it was something that I wanted to make sure people knew that they were celebrated on that end. And so it's even little things that you can do, like pull together. I actually had one particular associate who had never seen the movie Rookie of the Year. And so I decided I was going to reserve a conference room, and we brought the whole team in, and I said, we have to solve this problem right now, right? Like this is how can you get through life without seeing Rookie of the Year? So we solved that problem. But some of it, right, is like making sure that you're making your work environment as fun as possible, knowing that you've got in healthcare, right? We have a very serious job that we do. But we're humans caring for humans, and therefore you've got to make sure all humans are cared for, including your teammates. But it's looking at the bigger picture, and that takes effort, right? I think people just expect that birthdays happen, right? They just expect that these other things happen, and a lot of times it's on that particular leader to make sure things are getting done. You've always heard like there's that one department that never does anything done, never does anything fun. It's like you don't want to be that department, right? Like you want to be the department where people want to spend
Yeah.
time with.
Well, and I think it could be easy for somebody to poo poo the message of do something fun. And I would
Yeah.
challenge those people to perceive it differently and recognize like what you really need to build culture are normalized human relationships. And
Yes.
so the things that are normal inside of your company are your culture. And so you want a culture that recognizes individuality. You want a culture that actually fosters tighter human to human connections. If for no other reason, then it's a heck of a lot easier to be a leader when you know what motivates the other person than otherwise. If no other reason, that's not the only reason. But if that's all you had, that would still make that a cultural win. And that's what I think the value of the fun is. Not that I don't like having the
Hmm.
fun too. It's just I can hear potentially somebody saying, you're telling me I have to do what Google did and give everybody free meals and nap pods. And it's like, well, no, hold on.
Right.
Celebrate human connection in unique and interesting ways that are meaningful. And birthdays just happen to be a simple, socially acceptable way to do so. Find a different one if
Right.
you want. Yeah.
Exactly. But we did at so in the senior housing space, I have communities in Florida, and Florida is prone to hurricanes. And so we have had many scenarios where we've had hurricanes coming towards Florida. We had one particular situation in 2022 where we had to do a full evacuation of a building. And so we moved 88 residents from Fort Myers to Fort Lauderdale. And so I flew down, my business partner flew down, all of my regional partners flew down. We slept on the floor. We were there, most of us were there 5 days on kind of different shifts. But not one person complained about it because they knew it was important. And it was because of the culture that we have been cultivating since the beginning. And it's like, this is what at the end of the day, our job is to keep our residents safe. And does that mean sleeping on the floor in Florida without air conditioning is what I really want to do? Not in particular, but it's what we need to do to make sure. And we've had multiple scenarios like that where my teams have flown in and just at the drop of a hat did anything, and it's because the culture that we created, and it's why it's so important to make sure that you're putting your people first. I mean, even the most basic thing Bill Sheriff at Brookdale used to say, if you do the right thing, the bottom line takes care of itself. And that is so true. If you do the right thing by your people, by your customer, always the bottom line always takes care of itself. And my dad used to say people are important, not things. And it's certainly something that we used to make fun of him for as teenagers, my sister and I. But in particular, the people, you need the people to get the job done, and your people are your most important asset. And I think when we forget about that, that's where we end up stumbling. And it is so important to make sure that your people know that they're valued. And then when you need them to show up, they do. And they show up with a good attitude, and they grind out, and they're sleeping on the floor, and they're making grilled cheeses out with a grill outside. They're doing the things that you need to do because you show up for them and they show up for you.
Well, and I can only imagine how much closer your team was after they, had to fly into the west coast of Florida and transport 88
Mhm.
people to the east coast of Florida in an emergency
Mhm.
situation. People bond over
Yeah. Oh my
hardship when
gosh.
they're striving in the same direction, right? There's a reason that corporate retreats often involve some sort of um, enemy,
Yeah.
objective, or challenge, whether it's climb a cliff or do a ropes course or sail this boat or conquer this mountain, right? Accomplishing a difficult thing shoulder to shoulder is the most bonding thing that can happen for humans. And so you have to earn the right to ask people to do that, though. And those birthday celebrations or one-on-one conversations or, you know, hug or beer or coffee when appropriate in developing a real human to human connection is what caused somebody to get on the airplane to fly to Florida in the first place. And then the bonding of striving in the same direction happened. So good for you for seeing that perspective, and also good for you for being able to sell that internally. That's not always easy. And
Right.
my perception of the senior living space is limited as it is, but my perception of that space is um, most organizations, large ones, are very cost restrictive. And because like there's no shortage of people, it's just incredibly difficult to deliver the level of service required at a healthy enough margin to scale.
Right.
That's brutally
Yes.
difficult to do in that industry.
Mhm.
And so selling internal investment in your people is a boulder to push up a hill if it's not a necessary cost, depending on the culture of the organization. That's my
Right.
perception from the outside.
Correct. I think that's fair. That's fair. Yes.
So maybe we could talk about that side of leadership, right? Because part of leadership is leading the people. The audience can't see this, but I'm like, you're at the top of your team's pyramid, if you will, right? And your job is to lead them and unlock that human potential and influence them towards advantage. But the other half of the leadership coin, when you mature into that role, is you have peers and bosses who you also lead. And that's a different form of influence without authority. Maybe you could talk a little bit because you've risen through the ranks at that level. What have you learned about peer to peer leadership or even peer to boss leadership? And how do the mechanisms or internal dynamics change as that in that form?
Yeah, and I think you make a great point. I was told early on in my career, you have to manage up, right, to your boss. You have to manage up to whoever your leader is, who your boss is, who your supervisor is. And what does that mean, right? It's some of it is if you need something from them when you have a one-on-one, you have a list of all the things that you need. You come with an agenda, you come prepared. You make sure that they know what you're expecting from them. Trying to be where you can, one or two steps ahead and saying, "Okay, I you're telling me about this. Do I need to also produce this PowerPoint deck, right? Do I need to produce this Excel data point behind it too?" But it's managing up to make sure that your leaders are delivering on what you need as an associate. And that can be a difficult conversation. It feels uncomfortable to come into somebody who's in a leadership role and say, here's what I need from you. I need you to do these things. I need you to show up because kind of what we had said earlier, some of that stuff is just not taught, right? Like we do a great job at a specific task, right? We've got a widget, we're doing that and we excel at that, but nobody trained us on how to have those other conversations about getting what you need. And so, I think some of that is certainly having a leader partner, whoever it is, that's open to that feedback too. I mean, most good leaders are. Most good leaders need to know where their blind spots are, and we may not always love it or want to hear it, but somebody saying, "Hey, I need this from you," is important. I had a colleague of mine when our one-on-ones would occur, and I do have a tendency to get a little bit distracted if my email's up, and she said, "Hey, like you don't feel like you're paying attention to me. And so I was very, um, kind of very intentional on shutting my computer down when I was having a one-on-one with that person so that I didn't get distracted because there's 75,000 things running through my brain constantly. And so, being able to do that is important. And I think just the peer-to-peer side as well. I think it's really important to make sure that those relationships are cultivated too. I mean, there are some circumstances if we pulled the team together for a social event, I would go out for a period of time and then I would leave and let the rest of the team kind of hang out without me there because I feel like that's a way to cultivate a different relationship when you're especially if you're in a remote environment and then you're pulling people together for one-on-one teams. I think that is or not one-on-one teams, but for a team meeting, I think it's important to make sure that people have time on a peer level to interact with folks outside of a leadership team member too. And then, I think if you set really clear expectations, tell the teams, here's a problem we need to solve, and then take a step back and let them solve it, or at least pull some potential solutions together. It forces that group to work alongside each other for a solution versus just looking to your team leader or your leader to solve the problem without their feedback or opinion. Because a lot of times, right, the problem we're solving, these folks are the subject matter experts or the end users. They know what the challenge is and they can tell you how to fix it. But I think it's letting those folks have some time together to cultivate their own relationships are important. And then, also it's creating maybe some fun competitions with between each other or departments. And so you've got that not quite organic because I've created a competition, but there is some organic team building that occurs when you take a step out and say, okay, here's what we're trying to get to. Here's the prize, figure it out. And we did that a lot when I was at Wickshire. We would do sales competitions where we would have communities compete against each other. And naturally, right, you have that friendly competition, which drives performance too.
What, as you think back, what were some of the toe stubbings that happened peer to peer or peer to boss as you learned that part of the learning curve? Or do you have any? You don't have to, go too deep on it, but I would love if you could. It would. I'm happy to share some on my end too, but like, there's a humanity to growing into this that I really like highlighting because it's freaking real for every one of us who's gone through this journey. And I'll give you mine first, I guess.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
have a personality that says if something matters, it freaking matters. And if it doesn't matter, we shouldn't waste our time on it. And so I would go to corporate boardrooms, right? It would be called in, we'd fly everybody in for a kickoff meeting or a mid-year meeting, and there'd be 15 other regional managers in there and my boss hosting this meeting. And if I didn't think something was important, I would challenge why the hell we were wasting our time on it. And if I thought it was important, I would charge every hill and wouldn't let go of it until we resolved it, which I like as a trait about myself and had to learn in a boardroom with 15 other smart people. That's not going to go very well. Like, we're going to get too tired or I'm going to piss that person off. And even if we're on the same page, now they don't want to participate in the conversation anymore. I had to learn a whole different lens of thinking about the humans around me rather than the point that I was trying to make and my conviction about it. And that I didn't happen fast enough. If I'm honest, took way too long for me to learn that. Do you
Sure.
have any experiences like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, well, very similar. Mine was more of I had to learn to control my facial expressions in the boardroom. If I
Sure.
didn't, because if I didn't agree with something, even if my mouth didn't say it, my face certainly did. And so I had a boss that was like, "Get off camera." He would say, we would be we would this was pre-COVID, but where you were connecting boardroom to boardroom. We had a couple of different corporate offices, and so we were all on camera. And he very clearly told me, "Get off camera because your face is not productive for." And it certainly had nothing to do with my actual face, but my it's like it's just not productive to this meeting right now. And part of that honestly was because I think for me I was the one that was gonna end up having to do all this work for whatever decision was being made, and some of that was me taking on more and more and more to grow without really knowing when to raise my hand and say, "I'm at capacity," right? And that is a lesson that takes a long time, I think. We have to get more comfortable with with what your work product is, to say I'm at capacity, or what do you need me to deprioritize? But it was, I had a few conversations where it's like, you've got to control your face, because this, and again, if you want to be a leader, like these are the things that you're going to have to do, because you can't sit in a boardroom and, even if you disagree with somebody, right, you can't make the face. You have to make the argument, to your point, of why maybe there's a different or better path to get to the solution. But just, furrowing my brows and making a stank face was not gonna serve me well. And again, that was, I'm very thankful to have to have had that conversation. I didn't love that conversation at the time, because I was like, "Yeah, this is a great idea, but you know who's doing the work? I'm doing the work." And part of that was me not having, I think, probably the emotional intelligence to raise my hand and say, "I'm at capacity. What do you want me to deprioritize to get this done?"
I love that that's the answer you came to, and that's one that I would support and champion wholeheartedly, is that the facial reaction, which by the way, you're not the only person by far who has an emotive
Yes.
response, whether it's face or body language,
Mhm.
back with your arms crossed, right? It
Yes.
can happen a bunch of ways. To convey their message without saying any words. But the solution to that is using better words. It's being
Yes.
able to properly articulate, hey, I support where you're going with this. And
Mhm.
how would we already have 45 hours of work in a 40-hour week? How would you like us to go about that? Or to your question, what gets deprioritized? I'm for it. And
Mhm.
these will be the consequences. How do we want to deal with those consequences? And that's a different skill to
Yes.
change your language in the moment, to really try to problem solve and get behind something rather than blocking it because you don't know the solution to the problem. Good for you. How long did that take? Do you
Yeah.
mind me asking? Like, what was the timeline for that transition for you? Mine was a couple years for a conference room one. So I got a lot of.
I was gonna say mine was probably like 2014 to 2015, 16. Like it was a, and again, it was, and I felt like every, probably every opportunity, right? You get better at it, right? You flex the muscle, you're getting better at it. I also learned a phrase that I use a ton is, help me understand whatever it is, right? I'm not necessarily challenging it, but help me understand why you're seeing it this way and I'm viewing it in a completely different mindset. And so that was good, because I think that that helps you take a pause when you're not like, and to your point, be like, tell me, why the hell are we doing this? Like, help me understand your thought process. And then maybe you say something that triggers something that helps me understand, okay, this is why we need to move that direction. But it's more of the, or I do a help me understand. I also like, I wonder if we did it this way. Like those are kind of two of my phrases that I like to use. I feel like they're less, they're my results when I use those phrases, right? I get people that are certainly more understanding or willing to have that conversation, as opposed to they're not on the defense immediately.
Yeah, and that's the goal, right? Changing your language isn't necessarily about one particular sentence. It's more what I want from the other person is an open conversation where I didn't
Yes.
trigger some defense or barrier that's going to make the conversation
Right.
harder. Depending
Yep.
on your relationship, you can say a
Mhm.
bunch of things to people, right? With some
Yes.
people, you could say, "What the fuck, man?" Like, "No, what are
Yep.
you thinking?" And other people, that's obviously off the table. Like, you can't.
Right.
The
Mm.
emotional intelligence, going back to your earlier points, being the humble and humility and just relationship awareness are going to help really fill in what the right words are there if you're aware you need to change them.
Yep. And I think that like trust too, building trust, which just over time, it is part of the culture, part of the team building. You build trust with your teammates. One of my business partners, she and I have conversations about everything. And every once in a while, she'll say, we're not enemies, right? Like you're not my enemy right now. And that's a helpful, I think that's a helpful phrase to hear, because I'm ops, she's sales. Sometimes, we have competing priorities. Exactly. And so it's like, I'm not the enemy here. This is a problem we're trying to solve. And but that takes trust, right? That did not happen overnight. I've known this person for going on 13 years. And so, that was just the cultivation of the relationship over time, but it's a very important relationship to me, and somebody that definitely calls out my blind spots. But you need those people too that can call out your blind spots.
And so you've really grown as a leader and thought leader and contributor in this senior living, assisted living space, which booming industry, not going away anytime soon. Demand far outpaces supply. You can go to any city in America and see new facilities being built or upgraded. Like this is a fast growing and probably growing for the next 30 years industry. What are some of, in your perspective, maybe unique aspects of this business or industry that maybe someone who doesn't have experience working in that space might not think of?
It's an industry that I fell into. I knew nothing about it when I got into senior housing, but it blends hospitality, right, with a healthcare perspective. And that really is something that is unique because you've got folks, if you're business minded, senior housing is a great space for you to get into because to your point, this industry is only going to grow. And it is only going to, I mean, we talk about the silver tsunami that hasn't even hit yet, and so that is going to happen. I believe we're going to get to a point where we have more jobs than we have labor to fill it. And that's a different problem for us to solve in the future with technology and all of those different things. But it is it's such a great industry because you think about the variety of residents that call your community in senior housing. We call our communities home. And so you've got doctors, you've got astronauts, you've got accountants, you've got teachers. You have the spectrum of folks that live in your communities. And we get to serve those folks, and it's the greatest generation, and they have so much wisdom, and they have so much just knowledge. One of the things that we implemented at Wickshire was a mentorship program where we worked with our residents. The residents got to mentor associates, which was a super cool thing. But this industry is great because if you're a medical director, if you are a nurse, I mean, we need great nurses. I'll put a plug in for nurses. We'll take excellent nurses. But it really does blend hospitality, healthcare, and a mission that you can get behind. Because at the end of the day, we are caring for the most vulnerable generation, right? We've got humans caring for humans. You need people that they have to have a heart, right? You can't be in this space if you're looking at senior housing as a widget, right? It's not a widget; it's a lifestyle that we are providing to families. It's peace of mind that we're providing to a resident, to families. But it is an industry that I have fallen in love with. Didn't know a thing about it when I got into it, which was honestly probably how I would do it again if I had the opportunity because I got to just be immersed in it and learn everything I could about it. But it just is it's mission driven and it's business minded. And we always say you can't have mission without margin and you can't have margin without mission too. And that's one thing. You've got this strategy, you've got market. I mean, you've got maintenance, marketing, clinical, operations, sales, every kind of functionality. If you think about if you're a college student looking at a space to get into, look at senior living. It's a space where not many people know about. And on the leadership side, it's a fast track. You can become an executive director, and then you could do an area director, director of operations, all the way up to chief operating officer, CEO, board member, whatever it is. There's so much opportunity, and we need good people in this space.
It really is interesting and unique space. Between my wife and I, we've had three grandmothers in assisted living facilities,
Uh-huh.
memory care, etc. And
Yep.
one grandmother who really should have been in there. And the contrast of those experiences, right? Me looking at my parents and my wife's parents and the
Mhm.
grandmothers who are in those facilities and the one who really needed to be, the burden and the weight of the one who wasn't able to be in one of those facilities was just
Yes.
overwhelming. And so there really is such a massive value to the families, to the
Mhm.
lifestyle, to the um, to the peace of mind that you mentioned, the physical security, like all of that is just an incredible amount of value that they contribute. And it's really hard to do that in a profitable way.
Yes, exactly. Well, and to your point too on the just that what you said, most of the caregivers, right, are adult daughters. And so caregiver burnout is huge. And one of the things that we like to share with families is our intention, if your loved one is to make a move into any retirement community, is to allow you to become the daughter again and not the caregiver. And that is one thing, I saw it with my mom took care of my
Great
grandmother.
point.
Yeah, and it's just and that's what we want. And everybody's going to do for their family, right? Like for the most part, everybody's going to do whatever they can to make sure that their family is taken care of. But we want that adult daughter to be the daughter again and not to be the one that is the caregiver and is, juggling you're juggling kids and you're juggling your parents. And like that was never the intention, I think, for any of us, right? To be working and caring for a family and caring for your parents and dealing with the financial right. There's so many things that just exist, and so that is one of the. I mean, that's such a. I am obviously a huge proponent of senior housing. It's what I've done in my career, but it allows families to become families again and not the caregiver burden.
That is a awesome mission, to be really empowering adult relationships to transition back to that intended state, not the one it accidentally has fallen into due to life circumstances. And that's
Yeah.
what my parents lived with one of my grandmothers. So that's a really cool mission. What are some of the, you are in the COO role. You're also a
Mhm.
fractional COO, and you have a lot of experience and thought leadership to contribute on that side. What are some of the operational slash technological changes that are enabling that margin and mission relationship to stay healthy?
So, one thing that, and we're just getting on the cusp of it, but I think artificial intelligence is going to be huge on just helping to maybe relieve some of the administrative burden of the roles that we do in this space. So that's something that is absolutely coming. It's not fully here yet. But I think taking a step back, it's looking at our operators and making sure that they understand the basics of the business. And so, really it's a simple business. It's revenue and expenses, right? we You want your more revenue, less expenses. And it's making sure that our folks have access to systems to know what are you even working with. And so there are spin downs, there's review of your financial statements, your income statements, variance reports as to why it doesn't match budget. And really making sure that we're getting back to the basics and the fundamentals. Our industry is, I think we overcomplicate it. It's not a very complicated industry, right? There's revenue and there are expenses and there's care, right? Those are your kind of your three big buckets. Labor is a huge part of our expenses on that end, but making sure people understand and know how to use the tools that are available to them. We have spin downs, we have labor calculators, we have different things. We have electronic health record systems that should tell us what care that we're providing and should be providing to the residents. But a lot of it, right, is like we are tasking our folks to do, and it's senior housing. I think it's other industries too, but we're tasking our folks to do 85 different things, and we haven't equipped them with the tools to successfully do that. So it's looking at your tech stack and taking a step back and saying, what systems, what are A, are we using the systems appropriately? B, what process do we have in place to make sure that those systems are working effectively? Because you can have a CRM system, you can have an EHR system, you can have a financial system, you can have a spin down. If people don't know why they're looking at those systems, they don't matter. And so making sure that people have a true understanding of the operations of the business. And some of that is making sure that you've got different team members to support. But it's looking at your leader and saying, did you train somebody appropriately? Did we give them the tools to be successful in their job? There was a book that I read about Chick-fil-A. It was like Covert Cows and Branding. And that's not the exact title, but it's close. But it was a book that I read, and it talked about, as a leader, what Chick-fil-A's philosophy is if they're going to terminate somebody, they bring two letters, one to terminate the associate, one to terminate the manager. Because if the manager didn't do everything that they could do to train that associate successfully, then that manager should be the one that should actually be held accountable versus the associate. And it's the same thing here. We have to look at, are we providing the right tools and tech stacks for our people to be successful? And then in that same vein, on just kind of future looking, are we adapting the technology? Because It is coming fast and furiously, and if we don't adopt it, we're gonna be left behind, and then we're gonna be antiquated, and then, you can't compete with the different operators. But it goes back to the basics. Do our people even know what business they're managing? Do they know how to run a P&L? Do they understand what a P&L is?
Sure. Well, and there's a lot of as simple as the business may be, there's a lot of intricacy to the nuance of how you might find margin in it. So, for example, I had a guy,
Yes.
I don't know if you've ever heard of the business A Mind for All Seasons or Eric Colette, but Eric and his business partner um, run a service that helps for cognitive. God, I'm gonna burn this. I'm gonna say it wrong, but just like cognitive healing, maybe a better way to say it. Like somebody who
Mhm.
suffers from dementia goes through their protocol and may be able to move out of memory care, or frankly, may be able to no longer need to be in the senior care facility they were in before. And there's a potential, depending on the geography you're in your business, for that to be a negative. But what Eric has found and what he was sharing on the podcast a few months ago is if they can help a facility um, somewhat predictably be able to rehab a person out of memory care, then they can then take somebody who needs to be in memory care from their facilities and have a bed for them. Because what often happens is that person can't get into memory care here, so they go over there. And you actually would prefer to retain that business and that person rather than transitioning
Mm.
them out of your system, and because it's expensive to attract a new client and transitions are expensive in general. And so it might feel like if you adopted a solution like that, you're actually losing revenue, when in reality, in the entire ecosystem of it, it's way more profitable to confidently tell a family, we can probably get them out of memory care in 6 months if we follow let's test, and this is what we'll try. And if you're right, you've retained that family for life and you'll backfill the memory care space, no problem, because there's a long list for that. So I suspect there's a lot of nuance in it that isn't necessarily obvious to the where your margins are really found when it comes down to cost of acquisition or retention. Same thing probably for personnel. Like you're in a business where you could throw people at a problem and therefore inadequate training happens all the time. But if you could
Right.
just figure out how to retain people for 6 months longer than you currently do, it would probably have an enormous impact on the P&L. But an average
Absolutely.
leader
And
doesn't.
even right, and even little things like, you think about clocking in and clocking out timely, right? If you're clocking in 15 minutes early, now we're paying you an extra 15 minutes that really wasn't scheduled time. If you don't clock in or out for lunch, now I'm paying you for an extra 30 minutes. So you could, in theory, get 45 minutes or more a day, which doesn't sound like a lot, right? But you multiply that by 50 associates by 2,080 hours, and those dollars add up very quickly. And so there is, some of it is making sure we're doing appropriate time management, managing to the residents need, but also making sure our associates are clocking in and clocking out like they're supposed to and not running. And so there are things like that, or looking at raw food cost and relationships with different food vendors to obtain, a group purchasing organization, right? You get better pricing. If you're ordering on formulary versus not, you get better pricing. And those types of things where, somebody may not think about it like that can erode your bottom line very quickly if you're ordering non-contracted items that are 3 times the expense of, you've got chicken A and chicken B. And so making sure you've got a good formulary in place, but exactly that, it's so nuanced. And even it's down to, organic leads versus lead aggregators where you're paying for the move in, and those can be very costly. And so you really, right, your best leads are going to be your resident and family referrals, because somebody enjoys living here, they want their neighbor, their friend, their sister, whoever, to be their neighbor too. And so that's what we really try to push, is that organic leads versus lead aggregators, because that becomes a very quickly becomes a very expensive line on the P&L statement.
Dynamic you just laid out kind of highlights one of the core things I picked up in your social media post or your LinkedIn post, which is, some of those problems you described could be solved in a systemic way. We could regulate purchasing contracts through an EHR that prevents you from ever being able to cut a PO to a party we don't have a buying contract from, right? That would be a systemic way to solve the don't buy the expensive stuff problem. But a different way is to empower leaders inside of the organization to, through information or training, to actually be able to make those types of decisions. Not so the clock in, clock out is a great example of that. You as the COO know we need people clocking in and clocking out on time. And you can preach that till you're blue in the face to your frontline managers, but what really
Mhm.
matters is empowering their skillful ability to navigate the conversation with an individual who consistently clocks in or clocks doesn't clock in or out correctly. That
Right.
investment in their leadership skill is not a systemic solution, it's a human asset development. So it's how at a COO level do you assess the value of systemic solutions versus human asset development solutions? Like, how do you weigh that?
And I think it honestly, the true answer is it depends on, kind of specifically what we're trying to solve on that end. But looking at, okay, kind of holistically, let's look at our financials, see where we've got some opportunities for improvement. And then once you drill into, okay, if it's a labor situation, for example, then I know, okay, I've got this tool in place, but maybe I have to go back and retrain my teams to better understand. And so some of it, right, is like dealing with it in real time, and being able to take a step back and look at, okay, what is the bigger picture? How does this impact the whole organization versus one specific community? And so, some of that is, I think, gut, honestly, and some of that is data driven, and looking at, okay, where are we having misses, or where are we having maybe we're having some good financial improvements. And so how do I take that improvement in one building and translate that across the board to other folks? And I would imagine in a scenario like that, where I've got 20 communities that are all running on the same systems, that all kind of materially are doing the same things, and I have one outlier that is incredibly successful. That to me is, it's not a it's that's not a system thing, right? That's a human thing. There's somebody at that building that is doing something. And so how do I glean what is happening at the community level, and then take that and translate it back to my other 19 communities? And so I think some of it is performance and data driven. Some of it is getting out and spending time in the field, whether that's, senior housing, or if you've got a multi-site operation, business, it's getting out and seeing what's happening at the field. Because I don't think that you can just sit in an office as the COO and know everything that's happening. Part of it is getting in the field, and working with your teams to understand what's happening. And you have to be a front. You've got to be a front and center leader. I don't think that you can, again, sit behind a computer screen and just bark out orders, and that makes you successful across the board. But I think it's going to vary based on what it is. But I always go back to data drives decisions, and then from there, look at the data, and that helps me figure out, is this systemic, or is this going to be a kind of a human capital scenario?
Yeah, that's interesting. It is a dynamic consideration. It probably has a lot to do with the goals of the organization as well. I mean, you mentioned the
Mhm.
silver tsunami earlier, right? And so, and it sounds like you do some work with organizations as they're preparing for or considering transaction. And so,
Mhm.
what are some of it in specific to your industry? Because there's some general things for any business, but what are some industry specific things that you find really effective at making a facility more ready for a transaction like that, to be acquired, rolled up, whatever it might be? What are the most important considerations for a buyer?
So I will kind of scream this on the rooftop. It's delivering a stabilized asset. And so when you deliver a stabilized asset, when I say that, it means that we don't want to come in, kind of pre-acquisition, and disrupt what's happening. Because a lot of times due diligence is happening before the community folks know what is even occurring. And so when you create that disruption, when people start to sniff out that there's a transaction occurring, they're going to take their future into their own hands, and they're going to go find alternative employment. And so that then destabilizes the operations at the community that's for sale. And so, when I work with folks that are buyers or sellers, it is like, let's make sure that we don't have, an Alta surveyor that comes in and blows the cover, and they're like, "Hey, I'm here for the community sale," because that's happened more times than I care, to deal with. Or a vendor, right, who spills the beans to a maintenance director, who then, goes to the executive director and is asking what's going on. And the executive director is not sure what's happening because they've not been informed. And so that just creates a huge problem on that side. And so, we think about at the end of the day, a business decision was made that's going to impact residents and impact our associates, whether that's on the buy or the sell side. A business decision was made. We have to make sure that the people side is not disrupted. So if I was an acquiring company, I'm going to make sure that my team is ready. We don't miss on payroll, right? You miss on payroll day one, and you have a lot of very unhappy associates because you might be new to the city, right? You may be a new operator to folks, and so if you miss payroll, there's already just you've created just a lack of trust within the operator. You want to come with a very strong training plan. You want to come with a very strong vision of what you want for the community. And then a lot of times what I instruct folks is don't come in and make changes the first 30 to 60 days, right? You want to take a step back, understand the operations, know what's happening, get feedback from the teams, and then you put your strategic plan in place. Now, I will say that there were some missteps in my career where as we acquired buildings or divested buildings between Brookdale and Wickshire, where we maybe kept some associates that, hindsight being 2020, I would have made different decisions on. And so it's I think being very thoughtful about the disruption at the community level, but maybe there are some positions that need to be turned over. And if you turn them over quickly, there may be a little bit of fallout, but you can recover because you've got a strong plan in place. But it's really coming to the forefront. You're gonna want to know what your material contracts are, right? You're gonna want to know what the big spend is. But really what you want to focus on is that people aspect and making sure that you're not disrupting operations, because as a seller, you want to obviously deliver a performing asset, because then you don't have to go back and do a retrade right before the sale occurs, because that can be a material if operations decreases, that's a material hit to the bottom line on that. And so there's all of that, but it's having a solid plan in place, making sure that your communication plan is in line, and that your vendors know when or when not to communicate, because I've had so many deals blow up because a vendor has spilled the beans before they should have.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense as you explain it. The buyer is buying future profits. And
Exactly.
the thing that's going to blow up your future profits is probably not your fixed costs most of the time. It's your variable costs. Oh, crap. We had to hire 30 new managers or 30 new staff. And by the way, we pissed off 30 staff in this community, so they all know they don't want to work here anyway. So now it's that much harder, and we have to pay that much more.
Yep.
We never controlled clock in, clock out time. And in fact, and that's the hardest thing to underwrite too, as an acquirer,
Yes.
is I can't underwrite retention very well. I mean, sure, I can look at your
Right.
previous performance and averages, but how do I
Mhm.
know you're going to maintain your key employees in this process? But if I did know that, I could be a lot more secure in the acquisition. That's interesting. That seems like
Yes.
it would be
But yeah,
true across.
that the labor piece is huge on having stabilized labor. I think that's probably one of the most important things when you look at a transaction, because they're going to help keep the wheels on the bus and not panic the residents, because residents are going to know, is my rent going up? Are you going to bring a bunch of new shiny toys in here, and I have to pay for it all?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Staci, thank you so much for being willing to come on and let me pick your brain about leadership.
Absolutely.
It's an area of passion for me. And I got to tell you, I can't tell you how confident I am in your perspective on prioritize people and humanize those relationships and change what you say in order to be more effective in those relationships. Like, those are all messages I've shouted from the rooftop for years as well. So it's fun to bond with a kindred
Thanks.
spirit. It's also validating that we both probably learned those lessons rather painfully, and not from some theory of an MBA, but from like, no, this is what actually works in like human leadership. So I thoroughly enjoyed connecting with you. If somebody wants to reach out and strike up a conversation with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
So they can email me at Staci at Poplin Consulting, which is on my LinkedIn. Like, find me on LinkedIn, Staci Lynn. And I'm around. My cell phone and my contact information is also on LinkedIn too.
Well, we'll post those links on the show notes, and I appreciate you taking the time with us. Let's stay in orbit.
Yes. That sounds
Thank
great. Great talking to you. Have a
you.
good
Yes,
one.
everyone.
Bye.